Recently, I read an article in Ami magazine, and I was very happy to realize that a lot of the source material and the Makoros that are quoted in this essay, we've already discussed last week. Like, for example, the Rambam's in Hilchos Tshuva about how important it is to be part of the tzibur, not be porish minat tzibur, and feel the pain of the tzibur. Or the Rambam in Hilchos Tainis, never to think that what happens is just a matter of coincidence, but it's all part of a divine plan. Also, the discussion about the power of tefillah that we had. A lot of this, Baruch Hashem, we've discussed in the past. I've sent you two texts, which I hope you received. One is a very long text. It's about 5 pages long. Hopefully you'll find it in your phone and you'll print it out. It would be great. And that is Reb Chaim Shmulevitz's Shmuzim to the Mir Yeshiva in 1973, just 50 years ago. And keep in mind that right after Sukkot, Reb Chaim required that his students return to the yeshiva, despite the fact that it was still Bein Hazmanim. And as we'll see as we go through his presentation, that he had a problem with the wives of his Avrechim because they wanted their husbands to be part of the post-Sukkot work in the house. There was a lot of things to take care of in the house, take apart the Sukkah, etc., etc. And Reb Chaim addresses that point as well. And then I sent you another text about the mitzvos that apply to someone who goes out to battle, and the lav of lotira, which enjoins us from going out to battle with a sense of fear. And there's a Rambam and a Rabbeinu Yonah that I want to discuss with you. So just as we introduce this, I just want to make sure you receive those two texts and you have access to them. Because, I like to learn a text with you. You know my style. Now, the great thing about Reb Chaim is that in addressing a situation that's almost identical to ours, what could we do if we're not on the front lines? Reb Chaim invokes a massive amount of source material. His Yedias in Agadah of Shas, forget about Reb Chaim as a Lamdin and a Magid Shir, Rosh Hashiva, but just his absolute dominion, I would say, over Agadah is mind-boggling. And when I talk about Agadah, not only Agadah in Shas, but Midrashim and many, many different sources that he puts together, it's just mind-boggling. In Rav Soloveitchik's class, very rarely, I was in this year for 5 years, I can't even remember one occasion in which the Rav decided not to skip an Agadah, but rather to learn the Agadah with us. And the very few shiurim and discourses that the Rav gave analyzing an Agadah are published because they're so rare and far between. But Reb Chaim didn't see it that way. And to him, Shas and Midrashim were all one entity, and to the same extent that we delve into the depths of the halachas, we delve into the depths of Agadah as well. And his analysis of Agadah is absolutely stunning, and we'll see a few examples here tonight. I want to suggest that you see a short video, if you haven't seen it already, from Rav Lau, the father of the present chief rabbi, the previous chief rabbi, in which he addresses the situation that we face today. And I could probably dig it up in my phone and send it to you if you haven't seen it. Of all the things that I've heard or seen since the break, since, shall we call it Shabbos, Simchas Torah, this, in my opinion, on a personal level, was the thing that hit home the most. He addresses the Chayalim, and he speaks to them about Jewish history. Very fascinating. So Bli Neder, we'll come back to that. I want to do what I did last week and introduce the Shia with a halachic discussion. Here's my question. I haven't seen anyone write about it, but I think we can analyze it. And that is the following. Would there be a mitzvah to kill Hamas, a member of Hamas, who at that moment in time is not endangering the lives of Jews? Meaning, is there a mitzvah to kill Hamas as a mitzvah in and of itself, not related to what's called Habala Hargacha, Hashkem Lahargo? Do you hear my question? Because again, no one would doubt that Habala Hargacha, Hashkem Lahargo. We discussed it in the case of Bab and Machteres, if you recall. But when it comes to Hamas, does the fact that a person identifies himself as a Hamasnik and maybe even carries weapons, but at this particular moment in time, he is not endangering anyone's lives, do we still nevertheless have a mitzvah to kill him? And that would depend upon what concept or what mitzvah. Anybody?
I would think he's a cheptza of, or a gavra of Habala Hargacha. And there is his own ideology.
Yeah, but Moshe, it's not enough to say that he's a Bola Hargacha. B'metzius right now, he's not a Bola Hargacha. I need you to quote to me one of the mitzvahs. Excellent, Mechias Amalek. Thank you, Rabbi Beasley. I owe you
or Midini Milchama,
but
or Midini Milchama, like you said last week. There's Dini Milchama, which are different from Rodev.
Well, again, I'm not even talking about the framework of Milchama. It could very well be that according to many Rishonim, the mitzvah of Mechias Amalek is not limited to Milchama. And even at a moment when there's no Milchama, there would still be a mitzvah Mechias Amalek. And I once told you a story. I want to repeat the story. It's a cute story. My father was sitting at a chasana, he and his colleagues, together with Rav Moshe Bick. And just for your history, I mean, you may know Rav Ezra Bick. This is Rav Ezra Bick's uncle, his father's brother. Rav Moshe Bick was the final posek in his time in America. Anyway, they were sitting around at a wedding, and they were, they were colleagues, the same age as Rav Moshe Bick. They had all learned together in, again, you can't call it Yeshiva University because Rav Moshe Bick would be turning in his grave. But they were learning in the yeshiva together, and they saw him at a chasana many years later, and they asked him the following: Rav Moshe, if we could prove to you that this person here is an Amaleki, what would you do? And in his inimitable style, he was a big batchin. He was very sharp, very funny. Rav Moshe says, I would take out my sword and I would kill him on the spot. There are many Rishonim who say that the mitzvah of Mechias Amalek is outside the Geder of Milchama. And it applies to killing an Amaleki. But the question is, who is an Amaleki? Do I have the right to say that a Hamasnik, a card-carrying member of Hamas, is an Amaleki?
Doesn't the Rambam say, Uchvar Avad Zichram, like Vida?
Excellent. In what context does the Rambam add the words Uchvar Avad Zichram? David, in what context?
He doesn't say regarding Amalek.
With regard to exactly, Moshe. In the case of the 7 nations, the Palestinians, there, the Rambam says in Hilchos Malachim that this mitzvah doesn't apply today because Basan Cherevu Bilbel Asa Umos Ukfar Avad Zichram. We can no longer identify any of the descendants of those 7 nations. So if I would tell you that this guy is a Girgashi or Yevusi, you would say to me, Mehechitesi. The whole world was mixed up. So Kfar Avad Zichram, we can't identify, no way how, a Yevusi or a Girgashi, etc., etc. But in the very next halacha, the Rambam speaks about the mitzvah Mechias Amalek, and he omits those 3 words. He does not repeat Ukvar Avad Zichram. And at the time of World War II, the Holocaust, Rav Moshe Soloveitchik making this diuk. I always learn from this diuk that you derive conclusions not only from the Rambam when he says something, but even when the Rambam omits something. Rav Moshe said that any group or any nation that gets up and says, "L'chu v'nachidem igoy," we will destroy the Jewish nation, that people has the status of Amalek. Meaning Amalek is not Zera Amalek as we understand it in the genealogical sense. It's and that's what Moshe was referring to before, an ideological identification with the destruction of the Jews. And that makes you into an Amaleki. So again, I'm not here to paskin any shilas. The Rav Zichron Livracha, because of the influence of his father, Rav Moshe, was opposed to what we call German reparations. And the Israeli government was taking in money from the Germans. The Germans wanted to, so to speak, clean their matzpun, their conscience. So they wanted to send money to Jewish people, to survivors, and to the state of Israel. And the Rav was opposed to it because he felt that the Germans had a status of Amalek based on what his father said. And with regard to Amalek, we have to destroy the rechush of Amalek. We're not allowed to benefit even from the possessions of Amalek. Supposedly, again, none of this is clear, or shall I say, none of this has been proven. The Rav changed his mind. He rescinded his original position because he realized that the state of Israel was building roads and highways from German reparations. It was impossible to oppose receiving these reparations. But the point of the matter is, no one can tell me that they know for sure, although there is a remez in the writings of the Vilna Gaon, but no one can tell me for sure that the Germans are genetically Amalek, that they are the descendants of Amalek. But yet, Rav Moshe and his son, Rav Yoshe Ber, they were of the opinion that the Germans had the status of Amalek. And I'm wondering out loud, I'm just thinking out loud with you, Rabbi Osai, nothing more. I haven't seen anything or heard anything, that Hamas would likewise fit this definition of Amalek, and therefore, even if at this moment in time, this Hamasnik is not endangering, threatening the life of a Jew, there would still be a mitzvah to take his life. Again, I'm not paskening. Again, let's not burrs on, don't get carried away here. But I'm just saying, la'alot et ha'inyan l'diyun, I think it's a fair question in our context. Okay, if you don't mind, I would like to use our time, because we started a little late, to present some of the ideas of Reb Chaim Shmuelevitz. And I think this piece that I sent you, this document, I believe, I have no proof of this, was actually edited by Reb Chaim himself. Because very often, he speaks in first person and he refers back to a different part of the essay. But in any event, it's a reliable record of what Reb Chaim said to the Talmidim in the Mir Yeshiva while the Yom Kippur War was raging. And I think we should pay a special attention to the sequence. Because Reb Chaim is addressing the question, what could we do when we are yeshiva students and we're not at the front line? What are we meant to be doing? And Reb Chaim has A, B, and C. So what I'd like you to do, if you happen to have a printed copy of this, if you were able to print it out, if not, then I would like you to write down Roman numeral number 1 at certain points, and then Roman numeral number 2, and then Roman numeral number 3. Because I think Reb Chaim has a 3-pronged attack and an answer to the question what we are obligated to do. And I think the sequence is very important. So I teach in the yeshiva in Beit Shemesh during the morning hours, and the menayel of the yeshiva got up in front of the yeshiva and spoke about the power of our Tehillim. He said the famous line, Tehillim keneged Tilim. You know what I'm talking about. And I wanted to raise my hand and sort of present a little bit of an objection. Obviously, tefillah is very important, but if you'll see, it's not first on the list of Reb Chaim. And I make a big deal about that. Reb Chaim's first point is about Torah study, not tefillah. Tefillah will be Roman numeral number 2. And he quotes a Gemara, and again, his magnificent ideas of Haggadik statements is mind-boggling. The Gemara in Brachas, on Daf Samach Gimel, I'm learning this together with you, Kol HaMarape Atzmo Midivrei Torah. Now, the word marape is a verb, the noun of which is rifyon. Rifyon means when you have a loose, kind of laid-back attitude towards Torah study. Ein bo koach lamod b'yeis tzara. And Reb Chaim is medayek that the opposite, if you want to be omed, if you want to have the koach to be omed b'yeis tzara, it's got to be the opposite of kol hamarape atzmo b'divrei Torah. And I'm very much reminded of another shmuz that Reb Chaim gave called Hachana L'Kabbalas HaTorah. It was a shmuz he gave before Shavuos, based on a parsha in Yisro, the parsha of Kabbalas HaTorah. And Chazal tell us that in preparation for Kabbalas HaTorah, it's basically in Orach Chaim HaKadosh, we have to run away from Rifyon B'divrei Torah. And Reb Chaim says that the paradigmic person in Tanakh who projects the image of the opposite of Rifyon Torah, meaning the total dedication to Torah study, is Yaakov Avinu. As Chazal say, for 14 years in Beis Shem V'Ever, he studied Torah Yom V'Layla. He didn't even put his head down to sleep. Some of the contemporaries say that he didn't wear pajamas at any time, because the Gemara says you can't go 3 days without sleep. But he never went to sleep at Kvius. He was too involved, dedicated to Torah study. And this is the opposite of Rifyon b'Torah. And when Klal Yisrael leave Mitzrayim, a few days later they're attacked by their enemies, and Rashi says, Al sherafu yedeim min haTorah. So we can take this statement of Reb Chaim and we could really, really apply it to many different statements of Chazal, that if you want to be safe during an Eis Tzara, then you have to be marchik yourself, go far, far away from a loose and laid-back attitude towards the study of Torah. We need diligence in Torah, dedication to Torah. We need what's called hasmada. And I'm going to add another word here, but I'm going to try to prove it to you from the next couple of paragraphs in Reb Chaim. We need ha'amaka b'Torah. It's not just enough to learn the Daf Yomi. We need something a lot deeper than that. And Reb Chaim goes on to say that the Bnei Yeshiva have this primary responsibility, but it's Bein Hazmanim. So Reb Chaim says, Bein Hazmanim is a time of Rifyon HaTorah. We have to transform it to a time of his Amtzus b'Torah, and therefore we curtail our Bein Hazmanim and we get back to the Safsali HaYeshiva, and it means that we, the married members of Mir, have to leave our wives. Says Reb Chaim, what about the wives? What do they have in an Eis Tzara? What's their claim to merit and is chus for Atzola in an Eis Tzara? You can't tell me it's Talmud Torah because women are exempt from the mitzvah of Talmud Torah. And therefore, Reb Chaim quotes another Gemara, Masechta Sota Daf Chaf Aleph, a very, very famous Gemara, has to do with the Sota. And the Gemara says that Nashim Ba'mek HaZachyan, how does a woman save herself? In what merit? And the Gemara answers, that they send out their husbands to study in the Beis Medrash. They send out their children, their sons, to study Tashbar in the Beis Medrash, and that's their schus. And this Gemara always reminded me of another pair that you may have in mind, of partners where one was dedicated to Torah study and the other was behind the line, so to speak, supporting him. Which partnership am I referring to?
Yisachar Zvulun.
Excellent, Yisachar and Zvulun. Whereas
it takes time to unmute, that's why.
Right, I'm sorry. Whereas in Zvulun it says, B'chof Yamim Yishkon, he was in charge of commerce. He was bringing in the bucks, as we would say, and he was supporting his brother Yisachar, who's Yodei Bina, who was dedicated to Torah study. And in that sense, Avrechim, every family in which a husband is dedicated to Torah study and his wife is supporting him from behind, raising the children, etc., etc., that's called a Sachar Zvulun relationship. And what schus do the women have to save themselves, protect themselves in an Eis Tzara? It's through the Torah study of their husbands in this context. And therefore, Reb Chaim says that the Avrechim should give up on Ben Azmanim, explain to their wives they have to go study Torah, and that study of Torah will save them from the Eis Tzara, because the opposite of study Torah is Rifyah b'Torah, and anybody who's Marape Atzma Talmud Torah is Ein Bo Koach Lamod B'Eis Tzara. Reb Chaim goes on, and he says that even a Rasha Marusha, the worst Hitler in the world, who wants to annihilate every last Jew, and that's Haman HaRasha, even he could appreciate the power of Torah study. And the Gemara tells us in Megillah, unfortunately, it doesn't say what daf. I think it's on Yud Aleph, I don't remember. And Mordechai is studying and teaching Torah to the children. Haman comes near him and asks him, what are you studying? Haman is curious. And Mordechai answers, we're learning about the Omer. And if we learn the Torah of the Omer, it's as if we brought the Omer. And Haman responds by saying, I understand that your Torah and your Omer will overpower, will trump, if I could use that word, the Aseres Alofim Shkolim with which I bought Achashverosh to write and sign the seal and sign the decree for the destruction of your people. So that Haman himself, Hodas Baldin Kimea Eidim Domi, that's today's daf, for those who are learning daf Yom, is Haman himself is confessing and admitting that the power of Torah can override his Gzeira Larad Lashmila. I don't understand if Reb Chaim and the Gemara have in mind a simple, shall we say, pshuto shel mikra understanding. Does the Haman really appreciate the power of Torah study? I don't know. But perhaps on a subconscious level, somewhere deep in the recesses of the nefesh of a Rasha Marusha like Haman, there's an appreciation for the power of Torah study. And the thought occurs to me, and please correct me if I'm wrong, that when we pulled out of Gaza, what was the first thing they did? Yamach Shema. Do you remember?
They burned the shuls.
They burned down the shuls. They couldn't tolerate the shuls. What does that mean? Now Reb Chaim quotes a Gemara in Eruvin. And for this, Daf Samach Gimel, again Daf Samach Gimel in Eruvin, we have to read a parsha in Sefer Yoshua. And Yoshua is out there battling to conquer Eretz Yisrael and defeat the 7 nations. And at night, somebody shows up. Vecharbo shlufa biyado. Who is that being that's holding an extended, outstretched sword? A sword is always a simon of Peronios. It's a malach. And Yoshua immediately understands that we must be guilty of some crime, and the malach is warning us of Peronios. This is before Melchemes Ai. So Yoshua has a yeshiva shechakira. He's trying to figure out what mitzvah did we not fulfill, and he had 2 possibilities. One was the mitzvah bringing the carbon tamid, and once again you would say also for mitzvah potem in a mitzvah they were busy with the mitzvah milchama, they didn't have time to bring the carbon tamid. And the other possibility was bittul Torah, they weren't studying Torah, and once again also for mitzvah potem in a mitzvah. I don't know if you saw that picture of a chayal who's learning the daf. I don't know if you saw that little video. Anyway, so the Malach says in response to Yoshua, Ata Basi, Ata with an ayin, meaning forget about the bittul atomid in the morning. Think about right now at night. You take a break from the battle. You're not in the front line, and now's the time to learn Torah. Why aren't you learning Torah? And then the pasuk says, that after the Malach checks out, Vayolen Yoshua Balaylahu B'toch ha'emek, a very ambiguous pasuk. What does it mean? Vayolen and Yoshua goes to rest that night in the Emek? Says the Gemara, Shalon bi omka shel halacha. Again, I emphasize the word omka, omek of halacha. It wasn't just that he was saying a shir in shall we say Ben Ish Chai or Mishnah Brura or something along that line. He was lon bi omka shel Torah. Again, I can't even imagine how he could get a nation of warriors taking a break at night and being lon bi omka shel Torah. Mind-boggling. But that's what saved the Jewish people at the time of the conquering of Eretz Yisrael from the Charbo Shlucha Biyado. Ad Kana Kofa Aleph. Torah study is first on the list, and it requires diligence in Torah study. Again, something that in this article he repeats, and he doesn't quote Reb Chaim, but he probably had that in mind, and he emphasizes how important it is to study Torah. Today I saw a picture, somebody sent me a picture from a yeshiva, where at every single shtender, there's another name of a chayal. And while they're learning Torah at that shtender, they are thinking of that chayal. I was very excited about it, and I want to try to pass this on to the two yeshivas that I'm teaching in now. So that's Roman numeral number 1, serious diligence and depth in the study of Torah. And I would add my own PS, my own comment here. It's not easy, because you have to extricate yourself from all the news. Because if you're involved in the news and you're wondering if and when there's going to be a ground invasion, and you're wondering whether or not the Air Force could knock out these bunkers in the subterranean city of Gaza and destroy all these tunnels so that Achayalim Chas V'Shalom don't have to go into those tunnels, and then try to concentrate in learning, very, very challenging. My hat goes off to anyone who has the ability at these trying times to really throw themselves into Torah, into the Vayolen Balaylo Bi Emek Amka Shel Halacha. Tremendous achievement for those who can achieve it. Ve'etza Shnia, Roman numeral number 2. Tefillah, of course. Tefillah, the power of tefillah. And Chazal tell us an amazing thing about the Milchama against Midian. There's a double language in the pasuk, seemingly redundant. It says Elef Lamateh, Elef Lamateh. What does that mean? 1,000 and 1,000? So the Medrash says, Mikol Shevet v'Shevet. In every single Shevet, there was Elef L'Milchama, the Elef L'Tfilah. They made a division. Half of the Shevet would go out to battle, and the other half was back behind the lines in Tefillah. And Reb Chaim is medayik from the Lashon of the Chazal, Harei tzrichem chad keneged chad. And he adds the following, Echad hamispalel keneged echad alochem. And maybe he has in mind, v'derech nevuah, that we should put the name down, as I said before, on the table. And you write the Hebrew name of the Chayal and his mother's name. He says, this is a chidush gadol b'toras chiyuv atfilah. Who would think that in an Eis Tzar, an Eis Milchama, we should focus on the chiyuv tefillah? And now he goes on to quote Yeshayahu HaNavi, who twice dubs the Mabul, we'll read it this Shabbos, as Mei Noach. And the famous question of Chazal, why is this is not a very, very good approbation for Noach, that the Mabul is called Mei Noach, as if to say that he was the Gorem of the Mabul. And Reb Chaim quotes the Chazal. Once again, unfortunately, at least in my printout, he doesn't quote where it is, if anybody knows, that Lefi Shelo Ispalal B'nei Doro. He did not pray on behalf of his generation. And now Reb Chaim comes up with his own Kal V'chomer. Very rare. I mean, we assume that Chazal knew the intricacies and the rules and regulations that govern a Kal V'chomer. We don't have those rules. We don't know how to make a Kal V'chomer. But Reb Chaim tells us there's a Kal V'chomer. Because Chazal tell us that the tefillah of the Rabbim is so much more effective than the tefillah of the Yachid. That's why we daven b'tzibur. Because we have no guarantee that God will hearken to our prayers as Yechidim. But when we gather together b'Rabbim, that tefillah takes on a brand new power and efficacy. And therefore, says Reb Chaim a Kal V'chomer, if Noach, whose tefillah was a tefillah's Yachid, could have saved perhaps the door of the Mabul, then our tefillah, he's talking to the yeshiva in the Mir, as a tefillah's Rabbim certainly could achieve an effective hatzalah from the Eis Sarah of the Milchama. And once again, Moshe Rabbeinu has a tefillah against Klal Yisrael after the Gzera, that Moshe Rabbeinu would not enter into the land of Israel, he would die in the sand dunes of the wilderness. Moshe Rabbeinu has a tain against the people. Why did you pray on my behalf? And the implication seems to be that had Klal Yisrael b'tfilas Rabbim stormed the pearly gates, if they would have had a tefillah, they could have changed the Gzera. And for Eschanon, the gematria of Eschanon is what? 515. Moshe Rabbeinu put forward 515 tefillos, and they didn't work. But one tefillas Rabbim could accomplish more than 500 tefillos of a yachid, even of that leader of Klal Yisrael, the great Moshe Rabbeinu. And now Reb Chaim wants to quote a Gemara in Baba Basra Daf Yud about the Haruge Lud. And I believe that what Reb Chaim is doing here, and please read his text and tell me if this resonates, he's trying to give the Avreichim a sense of identifying and appreciating the Chayalim who are out there in the front lines. And the Gemara tells us about Haruge Lud, that they were willing to sacrifice, which they did, sacrifice themselves for the sake of the people of Israel. And the Gemara tells us about Haruge Lud, that Ein Kol Birya Yechola Lamod B'Mechitzasam, that when we go up to the, after Me'av Yesrim, up there to the Gan Eden, and we want to get a seat somewhere in the proximity of those who are Moser Nefesh for Kiddush Hashem, forget it. Ein Adam Omei B'Mechitzasam. We can't even come close to them. And here Reb Chaim goes on in what I call Roman numeral number 3 to discuss the issue of pachad, or to be more precise, anti-pachad. Now, I have a kasha on Reb Chaim. And my kasha is based on the Rambam that I sent you in the second document, which is called Be'inyan Pachad Milcham. The Rambam says in Perek Zayin, Mehilchas Malachim Halacha Tesvav, Mi ha'ish hayarei v'rach levav kim mashma'o. A chayal who's out in the front fighting and battling a Milchemes Mitzvah is not allowed to be in a state of fear. And what is his fear? She'ein b'libo koach lamod b'kishrei milchama. U'me'achar she'yikanes b'kishrei milchama, if he wants to fulfill the mitzvah of milchama properly, yishoyen al mikveh Yisrael. He should rely on the Almighty, who is the protector of Israel, U'moshio. V'yeda, and the Chayal should know, Shal Yichud Hashem Hu Oseh Milchama. He is fighting a Milchemes Hashem. V'yosim Nafsho B'Kappa. No hesitation. Go out there like a lion and fight. Lo yira v'lo yifachid. And he should blot out any thoughts about his family. Lo be'ishto, lo be'banav, yimche zichro milibo. Unbelievable language of the Rambam. He should completely erase them from his memory. Don't allow yourself the luxury of thinking about your wife or your children. V'yifne b'chol davar l'milchama. He should have his mind single-mindedly focused, excluding anything else but milchama. And then the Rambam goes on to say that if he starts thinking, well, look at the danger that's involved. There are bullets flying in every direction, pagazim in every direction, then mavil atzmo v'over belotase. He violates a lav in the Torah. Al tiro, the Torah says. V'al ta'artzu paneim. And called me Yisrael tluyim b'tzavaro. Unbelievable language. But let me ask you a question. If you are with me in studying this Rambam, you should be able to answer this question. There's only one way of going here. When the Torah prohibits pachad, with the lavim that are mentioned here, I'm going to use a din, like a brisker kind of chakira. Is that a din in milchama, or is that a din that goes beyond milchama and would apply to every citizen, even those who are not fighting in the battle? Anybody? Again, I know it takes a minute to unmute yourself. It's only bidin milchama. Rabbosai, this is Perek Zayin Milchas Malachim, which is exclusively dedicated to the dinim of milchama. There are so many myriads of dinim that apply in milchama. There are lavim in the Torah, a whole slew of them. And included in those lavim, midinei kishrei milchama, is that a chayal who's fighting on behalf of Klal Yisrael, the milchemes Hashem, is enjoined from having any level of fear.
And he says, "Shekol Demei Yisrael." He says, "Shekol Demei Yisrael tzuluyin b'tzavaro."
Yeah, he's not talking about you and I, right? He's talking about protecting ourselves at the borders against our enemies.
I mean, one of the three pturim for a soldier is if he's afraid. No,
correct.
So once he leaves the front lines,
correct, Elliot. That's a din in milchama. In fact, Chaim Shmuelevitz himself, in another shmuz for Parshas Shoftim, he speaks about the contagious nature of pachad and how if a chayal is out there fighting the battle and he's overwhelmed by fear, how that's going to demoralize the troops. Because that kind of attitude is contagious and it brings other people down. There's no question in my mind. Again, you can question everyone's entitled to their own opinion. But in my mind, there's not even a shadow of a doubt that the Rambam understood these psukim in their context, kipshuta shel mikra, as dinei milchama. These are lavim that apply to yotzei milchama. And therefore, I found it a little bit strange, because Reb Chaim knows the Rambam, Reb Chaim Shmulevitz, knows the Rambam better than I do, that he would stand up in front of the yeshiva in Mir and talk to them about not having pachad. These were the Avrechim who are in the Oref. They were not in the Chazit. They were not up front in the front lines of the battle. But my son Binyamin sent me Rabbeinu Yonah from Shari Tshuva, which you'll see as the first source on this page. Now, Rabbeinu Yonah in Shar Gimel counts the mitzvahs. And it's very important to me that you meticulously read in the Shari Tshuva Os Lamed Aleph and Os Lamed Beis, meaning he separates two mitzvahs here. And in the first of the mitzvahs, which is Lamed Aleph, he addresses the mitzvah Lorisham, to inherit the land, conquer the land of Israel. And he writes, Ki tomar bilfracha, when you'll say in your heart, how could I conquer Eretz Yisrael and defeat these 7 nations? Rabim agoyim ha'elam imeni. These nations are much more manifold than I am. How can I fight the battle and conquer the land? Lo tira mehem, the Torah says, thou shalt not fear them. And once again, I understand from Rabbeinu Yonah that in Os Lamed Aleph, he's addressing those soldiers who are now, like in Yoshua's battalions, who are conquering Eretz Yisrael. But take a look at Lamed Beis, which Rabbeinu Yonah separates as a separate mitzvah. He opens up with the psukim in the Parsha Milchama, but looks how he interprets them. Ki teitzela milchama v'ra'isa sus v'rechev hamrav v'chol lo tira mehem, whose harnu bazeh she'im yireh ha. I'm going to leave it as an open blank. What should be the next word? Im yireh ha.
Chayal.
What? Chayal or lochem or yotze l'milchama. No, listen to the language of Rabbeinu Yonah in a separate, independent counting. Shem yira adam ki tzara krova. What does tzara krova mean? Doesn't necessarily mean a war.
He's got tzaras.
Tzara krova. I don't want to list all the tzaras. I don't want to be motzi mipi. Al tifto pele satan. Can give you a whole list of tzaras never. Ki yireh ha'adam ki tzara krova tiyeh Yeshuas Hashem belibo v'yivtach alea. What midah, what attribute is, according to Rabbeinu Yonah, obligatory and is enjoined by the Torah under the halacha of lo tira mehem? Which midah, which attribute?
Bitachon.
Bitachon. Who wrote an entire treatise about bitachon? Anybody know?
Rabbeinu Yonah.
Yeah. The Chovos HaLevavos.
Excellent. Rabbeinu Bechai. Tamar Goodman's, was the greatest Orthodox basketball player. His daughter was interviewed. She's a spokeswoman. Did you hear her? All about Rabbeinu Bechai on Midas HaBitachon. Who else wrote a book on Midas HaBitachon in contemporary, let's call it the 20th century? The Chazon Ish. The midah of bitachon, Rabbosai, where is the source in the Torah for the midah of bitachon? That I am obligated to rely on Hashem. And according to Rebbi Yonah, it's written in the Parsha Milchama, but it should be taken out of context. As a general mitzvah, so there are two mitzvahs here. In brisket terminology, tzvei dinim. There's one din, an obligation to run away from yira that's incumbent upon a chayal, and that's in Number Lamed Aleph. And in Number Lamed Beis, Rabbeinu Yonah has a separate mitzvah bitachon. Kishayira ha'adam ki tzara krova tia Yeshuas Hashem b'levavo v'yivtach alea. I found that absolutely stunning. And it might explain why Reb Chaim Shmuelevitz got up in front of his soldiers, Avrechim, who were dedicated to the study of Torah, and told them and warned them about Pachad, and told them to rely on Hashem. And as I said at the outset of this discussion tonight, the most powerful short presentation that I heard since the Milchama is that of Rav Lau. And if you've seen it, you'll remember that Rav Lau turns to the people of Israel. And he says, what is the people of Israel with regard to Milchama? He says, we are a nation of lochamim, of soldiers. And he says the following, it's not just Gidon and Shimshon HaGibar and David HaMelech, who's the great warrior. It's Avram Avinu. It goes back to the founder of that people. Because when 4 malachim, 4 kings, defeat 5 kings, and the Polit comes to tell Avram that his nephew, Lot, the great tzaddik Lot, I'm being facetious, was taken captive. He's a hostage. What does Avram do without hesitation, without even blinking an eyelash. And he is called Avram Avinu. What does that mean, Avinu? Avinu means that our genetic code is a derivation from Avram. How many soldiers does he take out to battle? 318. I want to share with you something I heard many, many years ago from my Rebbi, Reb Moshe Shapiro, Zecher Tzadik Livracha. Reb Moshe says, if somebody could do the math for me very quickly, that the word Yeush, Yud Aleph of Shin, is Bigematria. Who can do that for me? What's the Gematria of Yeush?
317.
317. How many soldiers did Avram Avinu have? 318. We go beyond Yeush. Or as the Rebbe used to say, Ein Yeush ba'olam. A Rebbe tzak. Li'olam and Yeush ba'olam. We go beyond Yeush. Yeush is 317. We are 318. And according to one opinion in Masechta Nedarim, how many soldiers did Avram Avinu have in his battalion? 1, because Eliezer is Bigematria 318. So we have in our bloodstream, Lochamim, the ability to go out and battle. And what does Avram Avinu teach us? By taking 318 yeshiva bachrim, I'm sure they were all wearing tzitzis, and going out to the front battle against the 4 most powerful kings at the time of the universe, of civilized nations. The Midah B'tach. How could 318 Shlobi Yeshiva Bachrim, pardon the expression, fight against the 4 most powerful forces in the world? 4 kings. And this is the Midah B'tach. And Rabbosai, if it were up to me, I would tell you that when you recite 3 times a day, the first brach of Shmon Esrei, which is called Avos, and forget about Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov for a minute, the threesome, the 3 musketeers, I would focus my attention on Avram, as Rashi says, Lo Yichto Ela Bacha, because Baruch Atah Hashem Magen Avram. Magen Avram means you have protected within us in our spiritual genetic code Avram. We are the embodied Avrams, and we go out to battle. And Milchama is not something foreign to the Jewish people, as many of us think, mistakenly. But Milchama is embedded in a very genetic code. And the entire Parsha in Shoftim of Milchama, and the mitzvah Milchama, with so many mitzvahs in Taryag. But now we're saying, to be mashlim what Rav Lau said, that not only is this obligation incumbent upon those who are on the front lines, but we are also part of that Milchama. We have also inherited something from our great father Avram Avinu, and that is the Midah B'tachon. And once again, I'm going to tell you, Rabbosai, this is not easy. I open the news, and we're talking about what's going on in the north, and Yimach Shemam, the other Hezbollah, the other Hamasniks, the other Nazis up in north, and they talk about what it means to go in a ground force, to try to. It's very hard, very challenging to be imbued with the spirit of Avram Avinu, of Bitachon. And yet Reb Chaim says it, and I think it's Rabbeinu Yonah, that we, even if we're not at the front lines, by the way, there was a campaign here to join the army for Haredi boys. So I read it carefully, because I did my miluim, after I did my basic training, I did miluim for 13 years in the army. And I was thinking, maybe at my age, I should be out there volunteering for the Israeli army. I don't know where I'm going to find my Pinchas Choger. It's long lost. Can't even find my boots. But then I read it carefully, and it said from the ages of 25 to 55. There went my dream down the tubes. My son Binyamin pointed out that if you read the Sefer HaChinuch carefully, he adds a certain word. You know, the Sefer HaChinuch is divided up into two parts. One part, he presents the mitzvah as he counts them. He gives you the ikar definition of the mitzvah. And then he gives you Sharshei mitzvah. And sometimes the Sharshei mitzvah of the Chinuch expands the scope of the mitzvah. So when you read the first line, you get the impression that he's defining the restricted application and scope of the mitzvah, but hold your breath until you see the Sharshei mitzvah. So look what the Sefer HaChinuch says, if you have it in the file that I sent you, in mitzvah Taf Kuf Chaf Hey in Parshas Shoftim. He says, Shenimne'enu, that God has enjoined us from Larotz Ulafachim Min Ha'oivim B'Eis HaMilchama. And you read the Sefer HaChinuch, you think he's on the side of the Rambam. And that the mitzvah of avoiding Pachad is incumbent only B'Eis Milchama. But then take a look at the Sharshei mitzvah. He adds a couple of words. He says, "Sheyesh l'kol echad miYisrael." We're going to add a little carrot here. What he means is kol echad miYisrael, even those who are not at the front line. Lasum Lashem Yisbarach Mivtacho. Ashrei HaGever Asher Sam Hashem Mivtacho. The midah bitachon. So I asked you the question about 10, 15 minutes ago. Where is the source for the mitzvah bitachon? And it seems to me that both Rabbeinu Yonah and perhaps we can add the Sefer HaChinuch saw and discovered the source for the mitzvah bitachon, which is incumbent upon all of us, b'eis tzara, in the Parsha Milchama. They extricated from the Parsha Milchama, not extricated, what's the word I'm looking for? They
Extrapolated.
Thank you. Who was that?
Eli.
Eli. I owe you one, Eli. I owe Rabbi Beasley, and now I owe Eli. Okay. Mirz Hashem, we'll see each other face to face. And the end of the Zoom, the Rambam in Sefer HaMitzvahs also adds a strange phrase, which you don't find in the Mishnah Torah. And in Sefer HaMitzvahs, Mitzvahs Lo Tasenun Ches, when he speaks about the Azhara Milira B'Eis Milchama, that we shouldn't have fear during the war, then he adds, Ube'inyan hazeh efshal l'kayim emunas ha'emes. Why is the Rambam introducing here emunah? I mean, this is a mitzvah that applies to Dini Milchama, as we saw in the Rambam in Hilchos Malachim. But perhaps the Rambam is alluding to the fact that there's a greater mitzvah that goes beyond Milchama, and that's the mitzvah of emunah and bitachon. Now we're on the second page of Reb Chaim. We don't have too much time, but let's at least finish the first section, and you'll tell me if you want to go on in a different occasion. Yaakov Avinu, when he realizes that Esav is moving towards him with 400 soldiers, the pasuk testifies, "Vayira Yaakov miod," and Yaakov was in a state of fear. The Medrash says, "Esav ledarko holech, v'ata sholech lo ko amar avdecha Yaakov." There's a tviyah here against Yaakov in the Medrash. Yaakov is going in his way. His way is the way of Cherev, with 400 soldiers. And what about your derech? What about your approach, Yaakov Avinu? Machzik bi'oznei kelev over b'rivalo lo. You're not facing him with your cherev, with your power. Sha'af sha'olech Esav li'lochem. Says Reb Chaim, what do we derive from this medrash? Esav is going out to battle. The arba meos ima ish imo. And not only that, according to the Medrash, each one of the 400 soldiers in Esav's commander was a commander of 400 soldiers. That's 400 times 400. Esav holech lilochem v'kuf samach ribu ish imo. Afilu hachi, nevertheless, ein lira mehem. Don't be afraid of them. because Esav is holech b'darko. It's like you're giving power to your enemy. And why? Because you're in a state of fear. This is one of the various Shmuzim that Reb Chaim gave during the Yom Kippur War. However, there is an entire series of Shmuzim that he gave. All told, I think there are 6 of them, 5 of them, or maybe 6, I don't know. 6 mamar. So we barely scratched the surface of 1 out of 6. Again, I have no agenda here other than the fact that, this shir sort of forces me to learn this because I say 3 shirim in the morning on 3 different topics. Masechta Bava Basra, another one on Hilchos Shabbos, and a third one on Shnai Mikra V'Echad Targum. And then in the evenings, I'm learning the laws of Kiddush in a yeshiva, different yeshiva. And in the afternoon, I'm busy with Daf Yomi. I don't know, Daf Yomi is like a shibud olam. So I really don't have the time to put into this, but I would like to consider the possibility, but it's up to you. Maybe we should continue this. In Mirza Hashem, we won't have to talk about Mulcham anymore, but we will be able to talk about the Midah Bitachon, the Koch HaTfilah, the Koch of Torah. And let me end with a tefillah and a bracha to all of us. We should be zocheh to see a great Yeshua. Again, I don't know how and where it's going to come from, how it's going to happen. Nobody knows how this is going to play out. But we need chizuk in the mitzvah of bitachon and emun in Hashem. We should be zocheh to hear b'sorot tovot and to bring about the geula shleva b'korov. Amen.
Amen.
Amen. Yeshua.
Thank you so much.
Kara.
Thank you.